The cemetery was quiet, only the sound of wind whispering through the trees. Billionaire Margaret Ellington stood before her son's grave, her chest heavy with grief she thought she had carried alone. But then she froze. Just a few steps away, a young black waitress knelt in the grass, clutching a child to her chest, her tears falling onto the same gravestone Margaret had come to visit. Margaret's heart raced. Who was this woman? And why was she crying at her son's grave? What happened next would uncover secrets Margaret never imagined. Secrets of love, betrayal, and a grandson she never knew existed. But before I reveal the shocking truth, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, because trust me, you don't want to miss how this story ends. It was a cold, gray morning. The kind of morning where even the sunlight felt too weak to break through the clouds. Margaret Ellington, one of the wealthiest women in the city, sat in the back of her sleek black limousine. At 70, she was still sharp, still commanding respect in every boardroom she entered. To the outside world, she was a fortress, an untouchable billionaire known for her ruthlessness. But today, she wasn't Margaret Ellington the tycoon. She was Margaret, the grieving mother. The car stopped at the gates of Rosewood Cemetery. The driver opened her door, but she waved him away. "I'll walk alone," she said quietly. She carried a bouquet of white lilies, her son's favorite. Each step crunched against the gravel path as she made her way to the far corner where his grave rested beneath an old oak tree. For most people, cemeteries were eerie places. For Margaret, this was sacred ground. Every year on this day, she came here, alone, without the cameras, without the guards, without the walls she had built around herself. When she reached the grave, her hand trembled slightly as she touched the cold stone. The name Jonathan Ellington was etched across it. Her only son. Gone far too young. "Happy birthday, my boy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I brought your favorite flowers." She knelt down and placed the lilies at the base of the gravestone, brushing away a few fallen leaves. Her chest ached with the same sharp pain she had felt the day she buried him. She remembered the way Jonathan used to smile, how he never cared about the fortune, how he said he just wanted to be free, to live life on his own terms. They had argued so many times, and now she would never have the chance to say she was sorry. Margaret bowed her head, letting silence settle over her. The wind rustled the oak leaves above, as though the world itself mourned with her. Then she heard it. A sound. A soft sob. At first, she thought it was her imagination. But then it came again, gentle, broken crying. Slowly, Margaret lifted her head and turned. Just a few feet away, at her son's grave, a young woman knelt on the grass. She was dressed in a faded waitress uniform, her apron still dusted with flour. Her skin was a deep, rich brown, and her eyes glistened with tears as she clutched the hand of a small boy. The boy couldn't have been older than 6. He pressed a pendant tightly in his palm, staring at Jonathan's gravestone as though he knew the man buried beneath it. Margaret froze. Shock surged through her body. Who was this woman? And why was she crying at her son's grave, with a child by her side? Margaret's heartbeat quickened as she watched the scene in front of her. The woman's sobs weren't polite or restrained. They were raw, the kind that came from deep sorrow. It unsettled Margaret, because grief this heavy didn't come without reason. The boy tugged gently at the woman's sleeve. "Mama, are you okay?" he asked softly, his little voice trembling. The woman forced a small smile through her tears and brushed his cheek with her hand. "I'm fine, baby. Just saying goodbye." "Goodbye." Margaret's brows furrowed. She couldn't hold her tongue any longer. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp though she hadn't meant it that way. The woman startled, quickly wiping her face as she looked up. Her eyes widened when she realized who was speaking to her. Everyone in the city knew Margaret Ellington. Some feared her. Others envied her. Few ever dared to speak to her casually. I'm sorry," the woman stammered, pulling the boy closer to her side. "We didn't mean to intrude." Margaret narrowed her eyes. "Intrude? This is my son's grave. Why are you here?" The boy's grip on the pendant tightened. He peeked shyly from behind his mother's arm, his dark curls falling into his eyes. Margaret caught a glimpse of his face, and her breath caught in her throat. There was something achingly familiar about him. His chin, the slope of his nose, even the way his eyes seemed too old for his young face. It reminded her of Jonathan. She shook the thought away immediately. Nonsense, she told herself. Grief is playing tricks on me. The woman stood, her hands trembling. She wore no jewelry, no signs of wealth, only the plain uniform of someone who worked long hours for tips. Yet there was a dignity in the way she squared her shoulders despite her fear. "I used to know Jonathan," the woman finally said, her voice quiet. "I didn't think anyone would be here this early. I just wanted to pay my respects." Margaret blinked, stunned. Few people outside her circle even dared to speak Jonathan's name in front of her. Most avoided the topic, afraid to stir old wounds. But this waitress, this stranger, had spoken it with such tenderness that it unsettled her. "You knew my son?" Margaret asked slowly, suspicion creeping into her tone. The woman hesitated, glancing at the boy before nodding. "Yes. More than you realize." Margaret's eyes dropped to the child again. His small fingers fidgeted with the pendant, an oval locket, dull with age. Something about it gnawed at her memory. The boy looked up at her suddenly, his voice innocent and curious. "Are you Grandma?" The words slammed into Margaret like a thunderclap. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She staggered back a step, clutching the edge of the gravestone for support. The waitress's face turned pale. "Ethan," she whispered sharply, kneeling to hush her son. But the boy's question still hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Margaret's world tilted. "Grandma." Her gaze shot between the boy and the woman, her mind racing. She had come to mourn her son quietly. Instead, she was staring into a pair of innocent eyes that looked disturbingly like his. For the first time in years, Margaret Ellington, the billionaire no one dared to cross, felt powerless. The cemetery air grew heavier, as though the oak branches above leaned closer to listen. Margaret stood frozen, her chest tight, her gaze locked on the little boy. His wide, curious eyes reminded her so much of Jonathan that it made her knees weak. "Grandma!" The word echoed in her head like a bell. The woman, still holding the boy's hand, stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "Please, don't be upset with him. He doesn't understand." Margaret snapped her attention to her, the confusion and suspicion spilling into her tone. "What did he mean by that? Why would he call me Grandma?" The woman flinched, then straightened, as if gathering every ounce of courage inside her. "Because he's Jonathan's son." The words slammed into Margaret like ice water. She took a sharp breath, gripping the gravestone tighter. "What nonsense is this?" she hissed. "My son had no children. He would have told me." The woman shook her head slowly, tears threatening to fall again. "He wanted to, but he never got the chance." Margaret's pulse thundered in her ears. Her grief twisted into anger. "Do you take me for a fool? I know people like you. You see wealth, you see a grieving old woman, and you invent stories to take advantage." The little boy's lip trembled at the harshness of her voice. He buried his face in his mother's skirt. The sight pierced Margaret unexpectedly, but she pushed the feeling away, hiding behind her armor of disbelief. The woman's voice cracked as she answered, "I don't want your money. I've never wanted it. I work double shifts at the diner just to keep food on the table. I came here today because my son deserves to know where his father rests." She glanced at Jonathan's grave, her eyes filling with pain. "He deserves to know the truth." Margaret opened her mouth to retort, but a sudden gust of wind carried a drizzle of rain over the cemetery. The sky, already heavy with clouds, broke open. Within moments, the drizzle turned into a cold, steady rainfall. Margaret didn't move. Neither did the woman. They stood facing each other, water dripping from their hair, their clothes plastered to their skin, the boy clinging tightly to his mother's leg. Finally, Margaret's voice broke through the storm, sharp and trembling. "If this is true, if you really were with Jonathan, then tell me. Who are you? And why did my son keep you a secret from me?" The woman's lips trembled. For a moment she seemed ready to run, but then she looked down at her boy, who gazed up at her with trust only a child could give. She swallowed hard, lifting her chin. "My name is Alicia," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I was the one he loved. But he didn't tell you because—" she hesitated, searching Margaret's face. "Because he was afraid of how you'd react to me. To us." Margaret's breath caught. She felt something inside her shatter, though she didn't yet understand why. Rain pounded harder, soaking them all. She wanted to scream, to deny it, to call the woman a liar again. But the boy, Ethan, looked up at her with Jonathan's eyes, and Margaret's heart stumbled. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt truly lost. The rain softened into a misty drizzle, leaving the cemetery wrapped in gray silence. Margaret's breaths came heavy, each one laced with disbelief. The woman's words replayed in her mind, "Because he was afraid of how you'd react to us." Alicia pulled Ethan closer, then guided him to sit beneath the wide oak tree to keep him from the rain. Once he was settled, she stood again, facing Margaret with eyes that glistened but didn't flinch. "You deserve to know the truth," Alicia said quietly. "Even if it hurts." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Truth? My son was a good man, but reckless. He wasted his time chasing dreams instead of building the legacy I laid for him. If he knew you, if he loved you, why didn't he bring you home? Why keep you in the shadows?" Alicia's shoulders slumped, as though carrying the weight of years she had hidden. "Because your world and mine, they were never meant to collide." Margaret frowned, but Alicia pressed on, her voice steadier now. "I met Jonathan 6 years ago. I was working late nights at the diner on 5th Street. He came in one evening, soaked from the rain just like today. At first, I thought he was just another customer, until I noticed how tired he looked. Not the kind of tired from work, but from life." Her lips curved into the faintest smile at the memory. "He ordered pancakes and coffee, and when I brought them to him, he asked me if I believed people could run away from their own shadows. I didn't know what to say. But that night, we talked until closing. And the next night. And the one after that. He kept coming back, not because of the food, but because he said I was the only one who listened to him without judging." Margaret's chest tightened. Jonathan had always been restless, always seeking freedom from her expectations. But she had never imagined him confiding in a waitress. Alicia's voice trembled but didn't stop. "He told me about the pressure you put on him. How he didn't want to inherit boardrooms or empires. He wanted to write music, to travel, to live. He wanted to be seen as more than the Ellington heir. And with me, he said, He finally felt like himself. She paused, tears spilling freely now. We fell in love. Quietly, secretly. He didn't care that I wore second-hand shoes or that I smelled of fryer oil after my shifts. He cared that I laughed at his silly songs, that I believed in the man he wanted to be. We dreamed of building a life together, away from all the noise. Margaret's lips trembled. For the first time, doubt began to creep through the fortress of denial she had built. Alicia pulled a chain from her pocket, revealing the pendant Ethan had been clutching earlier. She opened it and held it out. Inside was a tiny photo, Jonathan with his arm wrapped around her, both of them smiling with a happiness Margaret had rarely seen on her son's face. The sight struck Margaret like a dagger. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the photo, afraid to touch it, afraid it might confirm everything she didn't want to believe. That pendant was Jonathan's, Alicia whispered. He gave it to me before Ethan was born. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should keep it close so our son would know who his father was. Margaret's eyes shifted to Ethan, sitting quietly under the oak tree, swinging his little legs as he studied the raindrops. He looked so innocent, so unaware of the storm of revelations swirling around him. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but Margaret blinked them back. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Why didn't he tell me? Alicia's gaze hardened with a mix of pain and honesty. Because he was afraid you'd see me the way you're seeing me now, someone unworthy of your son, someone beneath your name. The truth stung, not because it was cruel, but because deep inside, Margaret knew it was true. For the first time since Jonathan's death, she realized there were pieces of her son's heart she had never truly known. And now, standing in the rain before his grave, the past was no longer a secret. It was a living, breathing child who called her grandma. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the drip of rainwater from the oak leaves. Margaret stared at the locket in Alicia's hand, her chest constricting. She wanted to believe it was a trick, a cruel fabrication, some elaborate story spun to prey on her grief. Her lips tightened, her voice sharp. This proves nothing. A photograph, a trinket. Anyone can claim to have known him. Anyone can forge memories to get close to me, to my wealth. Alicia's face flushed with hurt, but she stood her ground. I told you, I don't want your money. I never have. I just want my son to know his father. That's all I came here for. Margaret's eyes blazed. You expect me to believe that Jonathan, my Jonathan, would keep something this monumental from me? A child. Impossible. He was reckless, yes. But he would have told me if he had a son. Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying the storm beneath her iron mask. Ethan, sensing the tension, rose from beneath the oak and padded over. His small hand tugged gently at his mother's skirt. Mama, is she mad at us? The innocence in his voice tore through Margaret's defenses for a fleeting second. She looked at him, really looked at him. His eyes, those deep hazel eyes flecked with gold, were Jonathan's. The same eyes that once lit up whenever he played his guitar in the garden, the same eyes that pleaded with her to let him live his life his own way. The resemblance was undeniable, and that terrified her. Margaret took a step back, shaking her head violently. No, no, I won't be manipulated by this. You're lying. You must be lying. Her voice rose, echoing across the cemetery. Do you know how many women threw themselves at my son because of his name? Because of the Ellington fortune? You're no different. A waitress sees an opportunity and suddenly she claims to be the mother of his child. Alicia's hands trembled, but she refused to look away. You think I wanted this life? You think I wanted to raise Ethan alone, working endless hours just to feed him? If Jonathan were alive, do you think I'd be standing here begging for you to see the truth?" Her voice cracked, breaking into sobs she could no longer hold back. She dropped to her knees on the wet grass, clutching Ethan to her chest. The boy wrapped his little arms around her, his confused eyes brimming with tears he didn't understand. Margaret's anger faltered. The sight of the child comforting his mother struck a chord deep within her, a chord she thought had died the day Jonathan was buried. For a moment she saw her son again, not as the heir she had groomed, but as a boy who once clung to her after nightmares, whispering, "Don't leave me, Mama." The memory made her stagger. Her hands trembled. She wanted to scream at Alicia again, to push her away, to rebuild the wall around her heart. But her voice softened instead, weary and broken. "If what you say is true, then why didn't he fight for you? Why didn't he fight for his son?" Alicia lifted her tear-streaked face, whispering through sobs, "Because he never got the chance. He wanted to tell you. He was planning to. But the accident took him before he could." Margaret's heart clenched. The rain blurred her vision, or maybe it was the tears she refused to admit were falling. She turned away, gripping the gravestone as though it could hold her up. Her mind raged with denial, but her heart whispered the truth she couldn't bear to accept. The boy standing just a few feet away was Jonathan's son, her grandson, and she had almost let her pride blind her to him. The drizzle faded into a mist that clung to the gravestones like ghosts of memory. Margaret stood rigid, her back to Alicia and the boy, clinging to her son's name carved in stone as though it could shield her from the storm of truth pressing in. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse. "You speak with emotion, but words are wind. I will not let grief cloud my judgment. If you truly expect me to believe, then prove it." Alicia rose slowly, wiping her cheeks. She had known this moment would come, the moment when Margaret Ellington, a woman who measured everything in contracts and signatures, would demand evidence stronger than love or memory. Quietly, she reached into her worn leather bag and pulled out a bundle, carefully wrapped in cloth to protect it from the rain. She unwrapped it with trembling fingers, revealing a stack of letters, folded and refolded until the edges were frayed. "These," she said softly, holding them out, "are Jonathan's words. His handwriting. His heart." Margaret turned her head, her breath catching. With hesitant steps, she reached out and took the bundle. Her hands shook as she unfolded the first letter, the ink smudged slightly from age but still clear. Her son's handwriting stared back at her. "Alicia, I don't know how to tell my mother about us. She has a vision for my life that I can't fulfill. But with you, I finally feel like myself. I'm scared, but I promise one day she'll know you. She'll know our love. She'll know our child." Margaret's chest tightened. She read another. "I bought a little locket today, with room for a picture. I want Ethan to have it someday, so he always knows his father was proud of him, even if I couldn't be there the way I should." The letters slipped in Margaret's trembling hands. She clutched them to her chest as though trying to pull her son's voice out of the paper, to hold him just once more. Alicia's voice broke into the silence, gentle but unyielding. "He loved you. No matter how much he disagreed with you, he always loved you. He was afraid you wouldn't accept me, or our son. So he waited. Too long." Ethan, still holding the pendant, stepped closer. His small eyes looked up at Margaret, unguarded and earnest. "Daddy wrote me stories," he said softly. "Mama reads them to me at night. He said one day I'd meet my grandma, and she would tell me about him." Margaret's breath hitched. Her knees nearly gave way, and she stumbled back onto the stone bench nearby. The rain had left streaks on her cheeks, but now tears joined them freely, unhidden. She stared at the boy, then at the letters, then at the locket still swinging from his small fingers. The resemblance was no longer a phantom of her grief. It was real, undeniable, carved in every detail of the child's face and sealed in her son's words. Her fortress cracked. Her defenses crumbled. For the first time in years, Margaret Ellington wept openly. I didn't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My Jonathan, he should have told me." Alicia knelt in front of her, her tone raw but steady. "He wanted to, but fate took him too soon." Margaret's eyes dropped to Ethan again. The boy shifted nervously, clutching his pendant, uncertain if he had done something wrong. And in that moment, Margaret realized the truth she could no longer deny. The boy wasn't a stranger. He was blood. Her grandson. Margaret sat frozen on the stone bench, Jonathan's letters clutched to her chest as though they were the last pieces of him she would ever hold. The cemetery around her blurred, the gravestones melting into a haze as her tears fell freely. Her son had lived a life she had never truly known. He had loved deeply, fathered a child, dreamed of a future far from the boardrooms and power struggles she had forced upon him. And she, his own mother, had been blind to it all. The guilt was suffocating. Ethan shifted nervously at her feet, peering up at her with wide, uncertain eyes. Did I make you sad?" he asked, his little voice trembling. The words pierced Margaret's heart. She dropped the letters into her lap and slowly leaned forward, her trembling hands hovering in the air before finally resting gently on Ethan's shoulders. "No, child," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You didn't make me sad. You've given me back a piece of my son I thought I'd lost forever." Ethan blinked up at her, confused but comforted, as though sensing the sincerity in her voice. Margaret's gaze lingered on him, studying the delicate curve of his jaw, the familiar light in his eyes, the way his lips almost curved like Jonathan's when he tried to be brave. Every feature screamed of her son. She could no longer deny it. Her throat tightened as she whispered the truth aloud for the first time. "You are Jonathan's son. My grandson." Alicia gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. She had hoped for this moment, prayed for it, but hearing it spoken shattered the last wall of doubt. Margaret pulled Ethan into her arms. At first, he stiffened, unaccustomed to the embrace of this stranger. But when she held him tighter, warmer, with the trembling desperation of a woman clinging to redemption, Ethan relaxed. His small arms circled her neck, and he whispered softly, "Grandma." The word struck Margaret like lightning. She closed her eyes, sobbing into his shoulder. "Yes, my sweet boy. I'm your grandma." For a long moment, the three of them stayed there, Margaret holding the grandson she never knew existed, Alicia watching with tears of both sorrow and relief. But even in this fragile union, guilt gnawed at Margaret's soul. Her mind replayed every argument she had ever had with Jonathan, every time she had dismissed his dreams, every time she had silenced his voice. She had tried to mold him into her image, and in doing so, she had driven him into secrets. Her hands trembled as she stroked Ethan's hair. "I failed him," she whispered hoarsely. "I failed my son. And now, I almost failed you too." Alicia knelt beside them, her voice tender but firm. "You didn't fail him. You loved him the only way you knew how. And now you have a second chance, with Ethan." Margaret looked up at her, her eyes raw with pain. "Do you really believe that? That I deserve a second chance?" Alicia's lips trembled into a faint smile. "It's not about what you deserve. It's about what Ethan deserves. He deserves to know his family, to know love from both sides." Margaret looked at the boy again, his small head resting trustingly on her shoulder. For the first time in years, her heart softened, not with the cold pride of a billionaire, but with the fragile warmth of a grandmother. And in that moment, Margaret Ellington vowed that her son's legacy would not end in grief, but in love. The evening sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson as the three of them lingered by Jonathan's grave. The world around them seemed to still, as though even the wind understood the weight of this moment. Margaret gently brushed her hand over Jonathan's name etched into the stone. Her voice was steady now, though her heart still ached. "My son," she whispered softly, "I couldn't give you the life you wanted, but I promise you this, I will give your son the life he deserves." Alicia's breath caught. 4 years, she had carried the burden of raising Ethan alone, wondering if she would ever have help, or if Jonathan's family would reject them forever. But here, in this sacred place, the barriers were finally falling. Margaret turned to her, her sharp businesslike composure melted into something vulnerable, almost fragile. "Alicia," she said, her voice low, "I know I can never erase the years you carried this weight alone. But let me help now. Let me be a part of his life. Let me be family." Alicia's lips quivered. She wanted to resist, to cling to the pride that had sustained her, but when she saw Ethan's face, his smile brighter than it had been in months, her heart softened. "Family," she repeated softly, nodding. "That's all I ever wanted for him." Margaret reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was Jonathan's old pocket watch, a gift from his late father. She placed it in Ethan's hands. "This belonged to your daddy," she said gently. "He carried it everywhere. Now it belongs to you." Ethan's eyes widened as he turned the watch over in his tiny hands, tracing the initials engraved on the back, J.E. He looked up at Margaret with a shy but bright smile. "Thank you, Grandma." The word filled Margaret's heart with a warmth she hadn't felt in decades. She closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely, not of sorrow this time, but of healing. As they left the cemetery, Margaret insisted they ride together in her car. For the first time, she didn't feel like a billionaire towering above the world. She felt like a woman humbled by life, finally learning what truly mattered. That night, at her vast estate, Alicia and Ethan walked through halls lined with portraits of the Ellington family. It no longer felt like stepping into a cold museum of wealth, but into a place where Ethan's future might finally be secured. Margaret placed her hand on Alicia's shoulder. "This house has always been full of riches, but it's been empty of love. I want you both to change that. Stay here. Make it a home again." Alicia's eyes welled up, overwhelmed by the offer, but before she could speak, Ethan tugged at her hand. "Mom," he whispered excitedly, "we have a family now." Alicia knelt down, cupping his face, her tears mixing with a smile. "Yes, baby. We do." Margaret watched them, her heart swelling with both pride and regret. She knew nothing could ever bring Jonathan back, but in Ethan's laughter, in Alicia's strength, she felt her son's spirit live on. For the first time in years, Margaret Ellington did not feel alone. She had found her grandson. She had found redemption. And together they would write a new legacy, one not built on power and wealth, but on love, forgiveness, and family.